Welcome to Herbally Yours, an adventure into the world of natural medicine. Here is your host, Dr. Ellen Kamai, the natural nurse who will help you take the leap to ultimate wellness.
Greetings, and thank you so much for joining me, Ellen Kamai, the natural nurse, for another edition of Herbally Yours, right here on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. And we are an award-winning station. Today, we're so happy to have as our guest Dr. Kulreet Chaudhary, and she is an author and also has combined expertise in both modern neurology and the ancient science of health, known as Ayurveda. And she has uniquely positioned herself as an expert that can pull from the broadest possible base. She was the director of Wellspring Health in Scripps Memorial Hospital for 10 years and remains a pioneer in the field of integrative medicine. Today, we're going to talk about a very interesting topic called microbiome and mood. And Dr. Chaudhary also has two books. One is called The Prime and also Sound Medicine. So thank you so much for joining us today, Doctor.
It's my pleasure to be here, Ellen.
Now, let's go back in time and talk about what led you to become a doctor in the first place.
Oh, that's a great question. I don't even have a memory in my life where I did not want to be a doctor. Like, it was that strong of an intention. My grandfather was the village doctor in India where we lived, and he used to take me to his clinic every single day on his shoulders, and I would sit with him before I, went into grade school. And, I think your destiny has a way of mapping things out through early childhood experiences. And I think it was a combination of my complete love for my grandfather and watching the way in which he interacted with his patients, which was with so much love, so much compassion. And, he really understood their narratives, that all of that combined together, like, I knew I was going to be a doctor from like the time I was walking.
So you didn't have any kind of question. You just knew what your role was.
It was like an arrow to a target.
So that's fortunate. I would say I had a similar kind of, very directed focus, even when I was a child, to this day. Still the same thing. A lot of people tell me, but that's pretty boring. You only focus on one thing. How about fashion? I don't know, what am I wearing? So it's definitely an exciting thing to know your path and to be completely immersed in it. Now, did you learn Ayurveda early on, or what we would call Western allopathic medicine?
Well, so here's where the path took a sharp right turn without me intending to. And so I would say I definitely knew I was going to go into medicine. I had no idea, though, what kind of medicine I was going to be doing. Now, Ayurvedic medicine was definitely part of our upbringing, but we didn't call it Ayurvedic medicine, Ellen. It was just the way we ate. We meditated, we did yoga. We were doing all of these things that supported health. And I didn't really identify that as a medical system because it was really just a way of life. Of course, now we call that lifestyle medicine. And so it was there in the background. But then when I went into neurology, I really left it all behind and thought I was so much smarter than everything that, my mom had taught me, my grandmother had passed on, that I was entering into this brave new world of medicine. And then it wasn't until I got migraine headaches as a neurologist and could not treat my own headaches that I actually went back to look at, what was it that Ayurveda actually had to say about health? And that was my path towards curing my migraine headaches. And that's how I finally entered it, kind of consciously as an adult, as a medical system, both as a patient as well as a practitioner.
Well, that's a beautiful story and, very true, because I was teaching a class once on the island of Jamaica about certain herbs that grow there. And who came to my class were pharmacists and MDs, all of whom had grown up in Jamaica and their grandmothers had taught them
Yes.
about the same exact plants.
Yes.
And now, one was noni, in fact, and now they were purchasing it in bottles imported from the United States for huge amounts of money. And they're sitting there going, say, what?
Scratching their heads. What happened? Yeah. Same thing is happening in India, by the way.
Right?
Yes.
So, on the other hand, you talk about the fact that a lot of these natural remedies, and we'll talk about the microbiome in particular shortly, has actual evidence base now.
That's what's been fascinating about seeing Ayurveda unfold, because science has kind of taken the same right turn that I took, a few decades ago, although it's taking it a little later and a little slower. And they're starting to put together the dots. But almost every time I'll see some new, study come out linking particularly gut health and brain health and mood health, I'll look back and go, hey, this is exactly what Ayurvedic medicine was already talking about thousands of years ago. And I think it's as we're hitting the limitations of reducing us into little parts, like we're really hitting the limitations of how that's working as a medical system as a whole. We're great when it comes to emergencies, but when it comes to chronic disease, if we look at just one organ at a time, or we separate the body from the health of the mind, for example, we're just not very successful. And so as we're starting to come to have to finally accept that reality and the costs of that reality, we're starting to take a couple steps back and look more holistically. And as we start to study the body and the mind as a holistic system, lo and behold, we're proving exactly what we knew thousands of years ago.
It's so true. I was recently invited to sit on a panel run by the NIH, and it was called Whole Person Medicine. Mm-hmm. And it was about why these techniques like you're talking about, which now are so fully supported by evidence, right, as well as a very low incidence of adverse effects, why isn't that standard of practice?
That's a great question. I'm so glad you're doing that work. And I think when we get into the whys of it, they become nonsensical, because I felt like this when I first went into Ayurvedic medicine as a neurologist, as a practicing neurologist. Once I understood like the relationship, for example, between the brain and the gut, and I was like, wait a minute, why wasn't I taught this in the beginning? Like, it's so obvious. Once you know it, it's so obvious. Once you start practicing it, it's indisputable. It's indisputable because it just works. And I said, why wasn't I taught this? This doesn't really cost anything. It's based in common sense. And it's based in our lifestyles. And it's basically saying, hey, the person who's standing in front of you, sitting in front of you as your patient, is a human being and is not a liver, is not just a stomach, isn't just a gallbladder, but they're a human being and they come with their own story.
Well, I love your focus described to me as the microbiome and how your gut health is linked to your mental health.
Yeah.
Which is just a really astounding story as well.
It was really shocking to me as a neurologist when I first was learning this. I first got this lesson as a patient with migraine headaches. And when I went to go see my Ayurvedic practitioner, his response was like, everything that's happening to your head is coming from your gut. And I did a complete eye roll because I was like, what? My gut has nothing to do with my brain. And of course, because I was in such a humbled place due to the chronic pain from the headaches, I accepted his prescription. And that's, of course, the beauty of humility and having to go through those challenging life experiences. It makes you open. And after 3 months of doing his program, my headaches were completely gone. And so as I started, which of course I had no explanation for as a neurologist, as I started to study this and actually become an Ayurvedic practitioner, one of the things that really stunned me was the relationship between digestion and the nervous system. They were inseparable. If you wanted to change the way that you thought and the way that you felt, you changed your gut health. It was really obvious. And when your gut was out of balance, it would lead to, certain types of mood disorders. This to me was just so overwhelming at first because it just blew my model for, the brain and brain health completely out of the water. And then as I started to implement this, of course, now I was mainly seeing neurological patients. So I was seeing patients who have chronic neurological conditions, which oftentimes also were associated with mood disorders. So they came to me for those brain issues, and I started working on the gut because that's always step one in Ayurveda is work on the gut. And all of a sudden, their neurological conditions would get better, but their 20, 30-year history of depression would also start to improve. And to me, that was just amazing that, you have to address brain health through the gut simultaneously, and you have to address gut health through the brain simultaneously. It's one functional unit. It goes bidirectionally. You can't separate them.
That's a beautiful thing to hear a highly trained medical doctor and neurologist to say. But actually, that, of course, was always taught in the ancient traditional medicines. And when I use the word traditional, I honor that word and I make a big deal about it. We use the word traditional to refer to those systems of medicine that have been used for thousands of years with a very high incidence of positive effects and a very low incidence of negative effects. And they're traditional because they've been there for a very long period of time. Now, by the way, I am not against modern medicine. I'm a PhD RN. I've worked with modern medicine my whole life. And sometimes that is the choice that would be best for a real fast acting, stopping something. But you're not going to turn around a chronic condition with it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So how do you decide, like if someone comes to you, how would you decide that perhaps their microbiome, and we do have to define that word, needs to be reset?
It's not even a decision because if somebody's coming in to see me, they have an issue in their gut. In other words, from an Ayurvedic standpoint, you can't really have disease and have a healthy gut. It's just not possible. When the gut is balanced, disease, it gets stopped in its track. And even if something comes about like as an injury, like let's say there was some catastrophic injury, and a limb got injured, that injury would have a direct impact on the gut in a negative way. Part of the stress response to the injury, what the individual had to go through, all of that would have a negative impact on the gut. And so even recovering from like what we would consider acute issues still involves addressing the gut. So anybody coming in who says, hey, look, I have a problem, whether it's acute or chronic, I'm always looking at, first of all, what is the state of the gut? And then once we start working through diet, through the use of different herbs, through the use of different foods, we use food as medicine very often in Ayurveda, through things like meditation. Once we start working on helping to create a healthy core, a healthy gut, from there you can address anything else. So, and gut health is dynamic. It's not like, oh, I achieved gut health, and I check off my little box in life. Gut health is dynamic. Things change, you travel, crises happen in life. You face family issues that can all of a sudden throw off your microbiome. The microbiome is extremely dynamic. So it's just something that you have to get to know, like you would get to know like a good friend. And so you would know what makes them happy, what makes them mad, what makes them sad. And you just are constantly working with it. But you can achieve a level of balance where it doesn't get completely thrown off, even under the most significant, stressors. So
if you're working with a patient, do you do any kind of testing to ascertain, or do you just figure everyone's microbiome may need some tweaking, so let's do this?
So I love that you asked that question. I used to test up and down because doctors, we love tests. We love it when we can do a stool test and it shows something. We love it when we can, show enzymatic tests or neurotransmitters and all of that. And what I found was the system is so dynamic that if you had an argument, for example, in 24 hours, your microbiome would be completely different. Or if you did your meditation that day, your microbiome would be completely different. And so I realized that testing one point in time was really not the key. And so I switched to depending more heavily on the Ayurvedic assessment, which involves the physical exam and involves pulse diagnosis and involves taking like a series of questions about their daily routine. What are their bowel movements like? What is their digestion like? What is stress like? What's going on? And you're taking all of those pieces of information to look at what is the global state of the gut, rather than just looking at one single data point at one moment in time. And what I found is that if you understood an individual's narrative, their psychological narrative, their physical narrative, you had a pretty good map of what was happening in the gut and the mind. And so it takes more time to talk to the patients. You couldn't do that in 5 minutes or 10 minutes. That's why I see patients for an hour, because I'm really like teasing out what's going on. And we're communicating back and forth via email because I need to know what's changing, what happened. And that gives me a sense of, okay, how is this impacting your microbiome? So it's a completely different relationship between physician and patient. We're true partners. And I usually know things that are going on in my patients' lives that, their spouses may not even know, because I need to know what's impacting their microbiome.
So would somebody normally reach out to a physician with your kind of knowledge because of a gut issue, or like you're saying, something like depression or sleep disorders?
People come to me for everything under the sun. And when they come to me for mood disorders or, even autoimmune conditions, they're oftentimes surprised that I go, okay, we're going to start on the gut first. And they'll go, oh no, my gut is fine. I have a bowel movement every single day. And I was like, that is not really the litmus test for whether you have a healthy gut. A bowel movement every day is a good start, but there's so much more that has to do with gut health. And so I always start with a gut program. But now remember, I said that the gut and the brain are one functional unit. So my gut program always involves ways of helping to support brain health. So we always start with kind of this unified, connection between gut and brain. And we start with a program to help to enhance the health of both. That's always a starting point for anything that people come in with. And what I find is majority of the time, once you take care of that, I don't have to add anything in specific to another organ. That if somebody comes into me for lupus and I work on gut health and brain health, and we start working on stress management, that eventually the autoimmunity, the process of the autoimmune process starts to resolve, like it starts to back off. It starts to go back into balance.
And I find that too, because after you sort of fix one block, the other blocks tend to line up. And it's
Absolutely.
So satisfying. What you said was so important, doctor, because in any kind of natural medicine where we're not just trying to cover up a symptom, what's going on in modern medicine, I think is, I have to say, despicable. I mean, as a nurse, to see doctors come in and talk to a patient while the doctor doesn't seem to smell the patient
Yes.
or touch the patient.
Exactly.
They're at the other side of the room at the computer
Yes,
terminal,
typing
and
away.
their only focus seems to be to find that billing code.
Yes.
That's it. Once that's typed in, then they write a script for whatever it is the person's complaint is, and that's the end.
And it's unfortunate because doctors are being forced into that role, though. Like, we don't start out that way. Nobody goes into medical school saying, I can't wait to not interact with other human beings and spend my entire day on a computer, never having even made eye contact or feel like I've relieved any suffering for any human being. Like, nobody would dedicate themselves to such a long process. And unfortunately, it's the way that payment is made that all of the doctor's attention is now with the computer. And, this really hit me, Ellen, when I'm about to turn 49, and there were just some basic health stuff that I had to take care of, like as you start to approach 50. And I've been my own physician for the most part, but I had to go in just to get some routine stuff ordered. And I never tell my physicians that I'm a physician because I feel like they expect you to take care of yourself. And I sat down, and my physician, who was a highly, highly rated physician, she didn't look me in the eye once. Not one time did she look me in the eye. She asked my entire history while looking at the computer. The nurse came in, did vitals. She put my, the screening test that I was asking for, age appropriate tests, into the computer. And then she left. We never shook hands and she never looked me in the eye. Not once.
Unfortunately, I think that many people could relate to that. Well, let me remind our listeners that you are listening to Herbally Yours right here on 90.3 WHPC, the voice of Nassau Community College. And today, my guest is someone that you want to know. It's Dr. Kulreet Chaudhary. And what would you say the best place to find out more about you is, Doctor?
If people want to learn more about Ayurveda, I have a webpage with a company that I'm partnering with, and that's drkchaudhary.com. And there I have a series of articles as well as information on how to meditate. So that is a website that has a lot of resources, and it's just Dr. DRK and then my last name, CHAUDHARY.com.
Well, that's a good place to go. I actually wasn't given that one, so that's important to know. And also, you have written 2 books. One is called The Prime, and one is called Sound Medicine.
Yes. So The Prime ended up being published as a weight loss book, but it was actually my program for my neurological patients for brain rehabilitation. But because, it's a gut brain program, meaning it's a program for helping to reset that gut brain connection. And one of the most common side effects, other than, reestablishing healthy digestion and a healthier brain, was weight loss. And so my program became really popular as a weight loss program, although that was never even intended. It was just a byproduct of having a healthy gut and a healthy brain. So that is The Prime. And then my second book, Sound Medicine, is a summary of some of the work that I did, some of the research I did in rural India, in southern India, on the use of sound as a medical tool in ancient medical systems.
That's an interesting topic because people think, sound healing is all the new age rage.
No, it's funny to me that it's new. It's very ancient. The science, just like with the gut microbiome and mood, the science is catching up with us now. But this is all old stuff. And I always tell people, you can reinvent the wheel if you want to. Like, we have done this before. So we could also just, with a certain degree of grace and humility, look backwards and see, what did the wise ones of the past know that we are only now beginning to discover?
So let's talk about that a little bit, because it's interesting. I had some people who do sound healing, such as Stephen Halpern. He's a real father of New Age music and talks a lot about how frequencies and sound affect our mood. And you discuss that as well. How would sound help someone who's having mood challenges along with balancing their gut?
Well, let's kind of view the human body differently. And, a lot of the work that they did, the group of scientists that did the work with the NIH on the human biofield, they finally have helped us to create a vocabulary so that we can start to explain this. Instead of looking at yourself as bones, muscle, skin, ligaments, all packed together, if you can see yourself as actually a series of fields of energy, and some of those fields are really, really dense, so you can see them, that creates the physical body. But there are other fields that are subtler, and they're there, like the mind, it's there, but you can't necessarily see it because it is subtler. If you take this approach that human beings are actually a series of biofields collectively, then you start to look at the human body as really being just a set of frequencies. Now, if we are a set of frequencies, and if, let's say, every single cell in our body is singing or making music, and we do know that now for a fact that every cell of our body does have a sonic footprint, then if, let's say, a certain organ is out of tune, you could tune that organ back with the appropriate frequency. In other words, frequencies fix frequencies. And so if that area of the body was exposed to the correct frequency, it would come back in tune. And once it comes back in tune on that subtle biofield level, then the grosser biofields or the denser biofields, such as the human body, naturally just start reproducing healthy cells. That's really the basis of sound medicine. And so if we were to look at what would be the most powerful tools on the planet for transformation, it would be the ones that work with frequencies, things like sound. And that was the understanding in the past, that there is no deep healing without the use of sound. So sound was actually used even when herbs were prepared. And when the patients were given herbs, they were given special sounds that they would recite as they took the herbs. Sound was inseparable from medicine.
That is fascinating and actually makes a lot of sense on so many levels. Even most people can relate to the fact that, listening to music makes them feel a certain way, but it's so much deeper than that. Now, you did mention herbs, and I know that's one of the things that you support the use of in terms of both helping to balance emotions and also, of course, balance the gut flora.
Yes. So I always approach people, as I've said, with balancing the brain and balancing the gut. And my approach is multifactorial. So I introduce dietary changes, herbs, things that you can make in your own kitchen, as well as a sound practice. And so for some of the key herbs that I use, I always create something that is addressing both gut and brain simultaneously. So I have 3 favorites: ashwagandha, brahmi, and trifla. And ashwagandha is a well-known adaptogen, although we've been using it in Ayurveda for thousands of years. It helps to modulate the experience of stress in the body and in the mind. And stress is kind of the wrench for health, any place, in the body. Brahmi, which people may not be as familiar with, is an herb we use in Ayurveda to support brain function. So it helps to support creativity. It helps to support intelligence, memory, and it makes the brain more resilient also to the daily wear and tear of modern life. And then trifla is my all-time favorite herb. It's made of 3 berries, and it's an herb that helps to support gut health and really helps to reset and rebuild the microbiome so that it helps it create a healthy connection with the brain. So these are always kind of like my 3 staple herbs, and then I'll build the rest of the program around these 3 herbs.
Well, thank you so much for being our guest today. What a fascinating conversation. And I want to remind our listeners, you can find Dr. Chaudhary at drkchaudhary.com. Great place to look. And also you can find our show because it will be archived. So thank you so much. And thank you, listeners, for once again tuning in to Herbally Yours right here on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. For further information, email us at whpc@ncc.edu. This is your host, Ellen Kamai at naturalnurse.com, inviting you to join us next week for another edition of Herbally Yours. Until then, stay healthy.